We are now joined by Dr. Zeki Seskir with the talk Role of Multidisciplinary Collaboration in the Quantum Technology Ecosystem. Dr. Seskir is a researcher in the field of technology assessment. He conducts study in the quantum technology ecosystem landscape, education, and outreach research in quantum technology, and conceptual exploration for ELSA research for quantum technology. His background is in science and technology policies studies and in quantum information science. His research interests cover a wide range of topics from fundamental of quantum mechanics to quantum games to innovation ecosystem. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Seski, for joining to us.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, Not a lot to yet, but yeah, thanks. Let me share my screen and make sure that you can see the slides. Is everything working?
Yes, we
Uh,
see.
can you also hear me all right?
Yes, all can. Uh,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. Just feel free to, just intervene, stop me if I'm going too fast, too slow, or if you have a question at some point. I will also check the chat from time to time, but I try to reserve quite a bit of time in the end for discussions because I'm always, very eager to talk and discuss about these things, especially with new communities. As introduced, I'm Zeki. I'm a researcher at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany. Today I will talk to you about the role of multidisciplinary collaboration in the quantum technologies ecosystem. Um, During this presentation, if you see anything interesting or if you have any follow-up questions, just feel free to send me an email or connect on LinkedIn. So what I will do is I will do a quick and brief introduction to quantum technologies, not because you don't know what it is, but just to make sure that when I say quantum technologies, you have a general understanding of what I mean. And then I will talk about technology assessment, which is my field of quantum technologies at ETAT, which is the institute that I work at. And then this concept of responsible quantum technologies, which we focus on, and this concept of path dependency, which we utilize quite a bit. I think this will be the most important, like interesting part for you, like the diversification of quantum needs and jobs, and a brief summary, and then hopefully a lively discussion. So when I say quantum technologies, what I mean is a set of different technologies that are emanating from certain quantum principles like entanglement, superposition, uncertainty principle, that are basically, core principles or properties of the quantum world, which is like the world of like very small and not super fast or not relativistic particles and physical phenomena. Of course, when we say quantum technologies, there are different ways to cut it. This is the European framework. So in the European framework, we use quantum communication, quantum computation, quantum simulation, quantum sensing, and metrology as the main pillars of quantum technologies. In the US framework, the computation and simulation are combined. So there are three main pillars. But please note that these are, just basically the set of technologies that we, think about and identified yet. And these pillars can also, the number of these pillars can increase, and new quantum technologies can be added to these, over-encompassing lists as the fields mature. For example, like quantum thermodynamics. Uh, and One thing I usually stress upon or try to highlight is that there is a lot of talk about quantum hype, but it is not necessarily something new. So quantum technologies have been quite of like it has been around. Like the quantum technologies have been around for quite some time. Of course, not as long as AI or robotics or something, but the quantum information science. It leads to 80s, and then like Shor's algorithm and the first experimental developments in the 90s. Then a bit of like hype in the early 2000s, and then some uncertainty in the late 2000s, and from the 2010s, especially after the companies like IBM and Google and Microsoft start taking the field more seriously, we start seeing this interest in the field grow. And like in 2014, the quantum computer, or let's say quantum annealer from D-Wave, was already on the cover of Time magazine. Like after 2016, the misuse satellite, there's increasing interest in the use of quantum communications through space. And of course, after 2019 and the Google, supremacy experiment, quite a bit of interest in the field of quantum computing and like practically what we can do with these devices. Um, but the reason we as an institute are primarily interested in and working on this field is that there has been a huge amount of public funding and interest being diverted into quantum technologies in general. And like, I mean, 10 years ago, this map would have been quite different. I mean, there were only two or three major national initiatives, and now it's over 40 national initiatives. Which if you update this, I think there's an updated version on Kureka website. It's over 50 billion, US dollars. So like it's the amount of public investment going into this field is really considerably large. Uh, and of course, if you look at the European quantum flagships, motto, or let's say the mindset is that the future is quantum. And building on this premise, this year was also acknowledged by the United Nations as the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. And one thing I would like to, also mention first before going into what we do at ETAS is our institute's name is Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis, but in German it is Institut für Technik Folgenabschätzung, which is basically focusing on the consequences of technologies and not necessarily just the technologies themselves. And we work closely with the Office of Technology Assessment at the German Parliament in Berlin and Panel for the Future of Science and Technology at the European Parliament in Brussels. So there are a few projects that I will very quickly go over. The first one is the main project that we have called QTech, Quantum Technology Innovations for Society, which is intentionally vaguely named because it's a very exploratory project. We started this in 2021. And there were three main topics of inquiry we focused on. The first is landscaping of the quantum technologies ecosystems, which means like publication landscapes, startup landscapes, patents, national initiatives. And the second topic here was education and outreach research in quantum technologies, which is like which concepts are useful for outreach. Things like what kind of quantum games can be developed to help people understand these topics and concepts. And finally, something we call conceptual exploration and operationalization for ethical, legal, social aspects research on quantum technologies, which is a mouthful, I know, but it basically means we do studies like, okay, what does democratization mean in this field? What is readiness? How can you trust the quantum internet? Or like what is the certain trust criteria for quantum computers? So basically trying to explore different conceptualizations and look at how they can be operationalized for our kind of research. And with our Dutch colleagues at TU Delft and the Center for Quantum and Society, we organized something, basically a summer school for grassroots activists in quantum technologies. I mean, maybe some of you have heard like Q World or different, grassroots organizations in quantum technology. So like we basically brought people from 17 countries together in depth to talk about like the what are the ethical, legal, social aspects of these technologies. Um, and last year, we were commissioned by the German Ministry of Research and Education to do a general study on technology assessment for quantum technologies. Um, and basically, what we did was like again landscaping, interviews, surveys, and to develop policy recommendations. And finally, now under the German Parliamentary Office, we are working on basically the military use of quantum technologies, but with a specific focus on research, peace, and security policy. Which means like with the developing capabilities of these technologies, how we should think about from a policy perspective on how to respond to these maybe novel capabilities in the military and defense domain. Um, and if you are interested in it, I mean, of course, it's only in German, but I would very strongly recommend this report that we published last month for the conclusion of this project from the ministry. And we have been organizing an event series called Responsible Quantum Technologies at Karlsruhe, Germany, but it's also hybrid, so you can join. And almost I would say almost like more than 80% of the recordings of the talks are available on YouTube. Of course, we don't put everything there because like some speakers don't want to, just make their talks public, which is entirely understandable. Um, so what we mean when we say responsible technology development, this is of course a very caricaturized, version here. But basically, when we think about technology development trajectories, there are two different like extreme camps. One is focusing more on the risks, and one is more focusing on the profits. So basically, if you believe that a technology should be restrained, and like if it should only be introduced to the market and the society with no potential damage, then you are probably more on the risks camp. But if you focus on the profits and the potential benefits solely and you just ignore the risks, you're probably more of a technology enthusiast. Um, and what we basically work on and advocate for is something in between, in moderation. So basically, just acknowledging potential advantages, potential benefits, but also like maybe possible restrictions and risks. Um, and this is, I mean, usually considered under the framework of like the constructive technology assessment. Um, and we encounter this question a lot. Is technology good or bad for society? But I just for clarification, like this is not a very relevant question for us. And usually in our field, the joke is technology is neither good nor bad and not neutral either. So it's like each technological development, it has certain consequences, and quantum technologies will also have certain consequences. There will be intended and unintended effects. There will be desired and undesired consequences. There will be main and side effects, and in the end, there are direct and indirect stakeholders. And what happens in the technology development process is that neither the benefits nor the harms are distributed equally between different stakeholders. And one of the main things we do is try to identify, are there certain groups or certain aspects that are proportionally impacted by neither either by these harms or the benefits of these technologies. And the reason we are kind of working on this thing, especially now, because you might say that it's too early. The devices are not there and they won't be for quite some time. So what are we still like? What are we talking about or looking at? And in our field, there is something called the Cavendish dilemma, which basically means at an early stage, there's a much higher possibility of control. It doesn't mean that you will necessarily succeed, but it's much more likely for you to direct the technology in a direction that you think will be more beneficial for society and industry and your country. But there's very little evidence of impact because the technology is not there. Like we don't, I mean, we have quantum computers, but quantum computers are not necessarily, widespread. They are not really well developed, and they are not really deployed in industrial settings. So we don't know what will be their impact. I mean, we have some ideas, but we don't have the evidence of impact. And the dilemma is basically like when to intervene and how to intervene as well, because how to correct for a potential harm that you don't have any evidence of and you're not really sure. And for that, what we primarily focus on is now is something called path dependence. So, I mean, usually in an audience, I ask, do you know why, your smartphones are still using this, QWERTY keyboard layout? I mean, yeah, anybody wants to give an answer? Can type in the chat if you want. Like, what is the reason? I don't see anyone writing. You can also like unmute yourself and talk if that is possible. I don't know whether that is technically possible or not. Okay, I guess nobody wants to take me on that question. So yes. I mean, not really. So the reason this layout was invented, apparently, I wasn't alive back then, but was to actually slow down mechanical typewriter. Because if you are too fast with a mechanical typewriter, then the actual, the parts that are like the mechanical parts that are like hitting on the paper, they get stuck. So this layout was designed in a way that this like it's not super fast, but people can't get super fast, but it's still efficient for a mechanical typewriter. And then when we switched to basically these things, this I don't know whether you can see me, but these uh, electromechanical typewriters. Uh, yeah, it is bad depends because like right now there's there's no need for this layout. We have touch screens. You can do any kind of layouts you want, but we still use it. And I mean, this is one example. And another example is the size of the trains. So the size of the trains that we use are like that. So that is the size restriction because the rail tracks were built on basically they were designed for horse-drawn wagons in 18th century. And there's a really cool video on YouTube if you are interested, you can look at it. The sizes of the horse-drawn wagon were basically restricted by the sizes of the Roman roads that the tracks were built on. And the sizes of those Roman roads were not restricted, but designed with respect to the width of a horse's butt. And like there's a clear, historical connection between the size of an average Roman horse's, uh, behind and the number of people we were able to send to space with the space shuttle because the basically the shuttle boosters had to go on these rail tracks. And so from more or less a technical perspective, what happens is in an early stage of a technology development, there are many different options. And bit by bit, but especially on certain critical junctures, you start losing some of those options, and then there comes a point where everything is locked in, and then you have a certain, dominant design, and it's really hard to change. And one very clear example of this is the bicycle. So if you go like, 150 years back, there are many different types of bicycles out there. But right now, when somebody says bicycle to you, you automatically think one or like there are two different main bicycle types that we use today, and you can also think about this with like cars or planes or anything that has a certain dominant design you know now. uh, and what happens is, if let's say multiple different designs compete, uh, then what happens, like there are different adoptions by different actors in the field, but bit by bit by bit, at some point, one of these designs just is adopted by so many actors in a field that it's basically almost impossible to switch back from. And in the field of quantum computers, we are actually seeing this. Like there are many different designs out there. Like there are like superconducting qubits, there are photonic systems, there are CMOS systems, ion traps, neutral atoms. So we can say that the dominant design hasn't emerged yet. But at some point there will be one. And what happens is that, if you look at the history of technological revolutions and development of new techno-economic paradigms, it's always like the space of technologically possible things is much greater than that of the economically profitable and socially acceptable. So like, of course something has to be technologically possible. We can't have like quantum computers running on unicorns or something. But just because something is technologically possible doesn't mean that it will be profitable, and it doesn't mean that it will be socially accepted. And when socially accept, when we talk about social acceptability, people usually think about, yeah, these environmentalists, they are like protesting to this, but security aspects are also social acceptability. Like, is your national security agency going to allow something or not? That is also social acceptability because they are part of this social structure, and security is a value. Um, and basically, that's what is kind of happening now in the field of quantum technologies. Like, there are people, like companies, researchers, engineers, physicists that are very strongly working on expanding what is technologically possible. But within that expanded framework or like possibility space, there are a lot of people that are trying to find things that are both economically profitable and socially acceptable. Um, and when we are investigating social, acceptability, this is just one framework. There are many different frameworks, but this is something called, ethics by design, or like, value-sensitive design. And there are different, types of investigations you need to do. For example, there needs to be conceptual investigations, there needs to be empirical investigations, there needs to be technical investigations, and all of these need to be done simultaneously. And just to give you an example, so for example, for autonomous vehicles, I mean, obviously it has to be safe. Like if you want people to use autonomous vehicles, if you want to sell them to get, make them economically profitable, if they crash regularly, you're not going to be able to do that. I mean, legally, you're not going to be able to do that, but also economically, you won't be able to do that because people are not going to buy your devices, cars in this case. Uh, and then it has to be reliable, right? If you tell your vehicle, okay, take me home, and it takes you to, I don't know, your grandmother's home, then you're not really going to get that vehicle. And of course, it has to be comfortable, because if it's really like a torture to drive in these things, I mean, you might prefer not buy one yet. And all the bigger picture stuff like environmental sustainability, like equity, national security, like all the other things comes after that. So there is, in terms of this value prioritization, there are different values that you have to you must prioritize for, and then you should consider, and then you could address, and then other things come. So one question is, what are these values for quantum computers? Are these values the same for different types of quantum computers? And are these the same with different types of quantum technologies like the quantum internet? And these are very active research topics. We don't know, nobody knows. And if you know, and if you're able to very successfully address these, you will probably create a company, and then you will start attracting investments, and then you will become an entrepreneur. Um, So one example I can give from a research perspective is I don't know how many of you have heard this, but there's a thing called the Quantum Energy Initiative, which I really like, and I would very strongly recommend you to check their website, read their publications, and there's someone okay, probably not for us. In the chat. And for example, what they do is they do technical investigations, like what would be the energy consumption of superconducting qubit devices under different error correction regimes. So this is just one thing that needs to be addressed, because error correction algorithms are definitely very necessary for quantum computers to be scaled up. But while we are scaling it up, we also need to be mindful of oh, is like a fault tolerant large scale quantum computer, is it going to need a couple of solar panels, or is it going to need a nuclear power plant? We don't know. Somebody needs to actually do the math and look at the engineering requirements and constraints on that. And there's also conceptual investigations that needs to be done. There's also empirical investigations that needs to be done. So there's a lot of things that we need to address as the technologies mature. And this brings me to the final part of this presentation, and I'm really eager to discuss with you guys. Is basically, like, if you look at the state of the global quantum industry by QEDC, which is a very good report, I very strongly recommend you to read it, and it's like 8 pages, so it's very light read. Like now there are around 15,000 jobs that in pure play quantum computing, quantum technologies fields. And if you look at these jobs, it's like it has been relatively stable in the last couple of years, uh, and the growth is sustained in a certain way. Uh, but the particularly interesting part for us is like there is quite a bit of diversification in these positions. Like, of course, engineering and IT and research are still really important. But there are things like business development, there's sales, there's consulting, there's art, product management, social services. So like this field has been diversified. It is getting more diversified, let's say. And this is something that we checked as well with a lot of colleagues. If you're interested, just check the archive piece. And one thing that we kind of noticed while we were doing this, I mean, of course, these are LinkedIn. So what we did was we basically scraped a lot of job postings on LinkedIn, and then we tried to identify, we basically ran a lot of different analysis on it. And one thing that came out of it, as I said, if you're interested in the other types of analysis, you can check the paper. But it's basically like there is a lot of corporate jobs out there on quantum technologies. It's not just academia. It's not just PhDs. It's not just associate professorships. It's not just researcher positions at public organizations. Like there are proper corporate jobs out there even now. So it's not something for the future. It's still like it is happening now. Of course, compared to like things like AI, this is still very small potatoes. As I said, globally it's 15,000 people, which is not that much, but it is something. And One thing that is also quite relevant and interesting for us, and in terms of diversification, is like now there is more interest on the higher up governance levels. This thing came out of G7, which is basically the group of seven largest economies, uh, and they specifically highlight quantum technologies. And again, last year this thing came out of NATO on having a quantum ready NATO alliance, which means a lot of different stakeholders in the defense industry getting involved in quantum technologies. Uh, and one thing that if you're interested in like this this necessity of multidisciplinary collaboration, I would recommend you to check the European Competence Framework for Quantum Technology. It's an open resource that you can access, but you can just write it on Google or you can access it through the Quantum Technologies flagship website. But basically, the idea here is that there are different kind of expertise that is necessary for a successful and healthy quantum ecosystem. And if you look at like there are different like levels of expertise that you can have, there's basically a knowledge of the language levels. I mean, it's A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. But basically, it's a very detailed report that is open, publicly, that you can go and check and kind of try to look at, okay, what skills are necessary in which kind of different aspect of these technologies, like what is necessary for quantum computing and simulation, what is necessary for quantum communication and networks, quantum sensors and imaging systems, enabling technologies, foundations, hardware, valorization. So like if you are thinking like, yeah, I want to be in this field, but I don't want to be just a physicist or just an engineer, I would very strongly recommend you to go and check this competence framework. And with that, some concluding remarks and summary. So, as quantum technologies mature and moves from science to technology, the required inputs from different fields increase. This means there is a growing need for within the ecosystem for those who can connect different disciplines. Uh, Job options are becoming more diverse due to this maturation of quantum technologies, and of course, like different quantum technologies are at different technology readiness levels, of course. But well, I think we can all agree on that. Compared to what we were doing 5 years ago, right now the discussion and the narrative and the actual physical devices are quite different compared to 2020. And there's a growing need and actual demand for those who can understand the technical aspects while getting involved in more non-technical parts of a business, like marketing, education, sales, legal, and etc. And quantum technology is no longer just for physicists or engineers, but there's still a need for physicists and engineers as well. So the era is not over. So if you're a physicist or an engineer, don't be discouraged with what I tell you. But just that there's a need to go beyond the just scientific mindset to achieve this lab to market transition. And if you're a scientist, if you're interested in the quantum information science or quantum computing from a more theoretical and foundational perspective, that is entirely okay. We need people like you, but we don't need just people like you. We also need other people who can connect different disciplines and different aspects of these technologies to and bring certain other expertise into the ecosystem. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I am really looking forward to discussing. Are you guys able to unmute yourselves?
Thank you so much, Seki. Okay, we had a couple of questions for the public. The first one is about how can we ensure that quantum development is inclusive and doesn't widen existing technology gaps?
Um, it depends. So if I understand the question, I mean where it's coming from properly, it is always a double-edged sword. Like you want to be as inclusive as possible, and you want to invite different groups to the field, uh, but also we need to be a bit mindful about inviting people prematurely, because like there's still a bit risk associated with these technologies. I mean, of course, we all believe in it. I hope we all believe in it. But let's say in 5 years, there might be a very different, ecosystem, or like there can be like a quantum winter or something. So I think the main part should be, or the most important thing is honesty, and being transparent about what are the actual developments in the field, and not hype it within the ecosystem as well. So to try to be like transparent and honest with each other, and on top of that, of course, we need to be as inclusive as possible. I think you're muted, Brian. You're muted.
We can.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I am mute. Okay, so sorry. So we had another question, and it is in Latin America, we are building our quantum ecosystem for a very diverse academic backgrounds, physicists, engineering, computer science, and even social science. From your perspective, what are the key ingredients to make multidisciplinary collaboration truly effective in such emerging environments?
I mean, that's a very good question, and I would say one thing is, I mean, a couple of things. The first is just accept from the beginning that you will talk different languages in the beginning. So like you won't really understand where each other, are coming from. Because like different disciplines have different jargon, and also like their different priorities, they have different conceptualizations of the world. For example, if you're a physicist, you think from first principle because this is how you were trained, and you assume that everything should have first principle. But if you're a social scientist or a policy person, there are no first principles because these are highly complex systems. There are a lot of different emergent phenomena, and it's very context dependent. So when you are speaking with a policymaker as a physicist, which my background is physics, so I come from physics, but I also come from policy science. So like it, I can kind of understand how it's really difficult to create a common language that encompasses both of them. And this goes for material scientists, this goes for mathematicians, this goes for engineers. Like first thing you should do is try to accept that you will be speaking in different languages in the beginning, and try to create this common vocabulary, like a common language that you can understand each other. And of course, like second thing, I think most important one is building trust. So if you don't trust each other, then it's really difficult. So like try to engage in trust building exercises. And I don't mean like like leap of faith or something, but just meet with people, chat with people, try to have like a good faith discussions with them, uh, and try to align what are your expectations out of this field. Because I mean, as physicists and engineers, we want to build I mean, I shouldn't say we, but like physicists and engineers are more interested in the technology. The policymakers and the entrepreneurs, they are more interested in the commercial aspects. For example, like if we invite security people, they are more interested in the security aspects, and this is entirely okay. You just have to accept this and try to find ways to work around it, trying to not just push for primarily just for your priorities, because like people will, or different disciplines and different stakeholders will have different priorities. That's entirely okay, and that's how things work actually. I see that there is a question like it's true that quantum computing is becoming more mainstream, but sometimes with misleading headlines or exaggeration. What reliable sources do you recommend aside of papers? That's a very good question. So I would recommend basically identify and keep track of uh, the watchdogs and like the hype police in the field, like basically Scott Aronson and the Talwich and like quantum bullshit meter. Of course, they are not always correct, also like be a bit mindful, like take it with a pinch of salt when they are saying something is bullshit. But definitely don't believe the headlines because like usually they are very misleading because this is the attention economy, and then like a clickbait headline is definitely more interesting and like this more higher return on investment that compared to just saying something like, yeah, we had this very incremental development which will help us on the long run. If we have, I don't know, 500 of these incremental innovations, then it will be very much easier to build an error corrected device. But instead of that, what you will see is everything is a breakthrough, everything is amazing, everything is just shortening timelines. So I think it's a good question. And reliable sources is, as I said, like experts in the field try to keep track about like what they say about these more sensational headlines.
And we had another questions. So many researchers are passionate but often work in small and isolated groups. How can multidisciplinary collaboration help to connect these efforts to build a stronger regional presence in the global quantum landscape?
I mean, it's a good question, and it is hard because so I'm thinking from an academic perspective, like uh, disciplines are very siloed. And there's a reason for that. Like if you're a physicist, you want to work in physics related issues. If you're an engineer, or if you're, I don't know, mechanical engineer, you want to work on mechanical engineering issues. If you're a chemist, you want to work on chemist questions. And when you have these cross-cutting topics, then the physicists and the chemists and the mathematicians, they want to take ownership of just the parts that are relevant for them. So initially, I mean, if you want to have a successful like multidisciplinary collaboration, you need to be a bit more flexible in terms of which research questions you find valuable. So because like the things that are interesting for a chemist are not going to be the same that are interesting for a physicist, or the things that are interesting for a legal scholar are definitely not going to be very interesting for an engineer. So like you need to be able to just relax your boundary conditions on what you consider as a time-worthy endeavor in scientific and actual like research inquiry. Um, but that being said, there needs to be structural mechanisms that help you with that. So if you assume that all the funding should come from a physics faculty, but the engineers should also be able to work there, you will get a lot of pushback from the physicists there because the physicists want to fund other physicists and the engineers want to fund other engineers. So there needs to be certain incentives from the funding agency level to kind of promote this multidisciplinary consortia to be formed, because otherwise, like, I mean, if you're, as I said, like if you have a certain discipline, then you want to pursue research questions that are interesting for that discipline. Why would you go and look at what's interesting for a chemist?
Thank you, Zeki. Thank you for your wonderful talk. The Kubicab team really acknowledges that you have the freedom and the time to share all the experience with us, also for the entire community here in Latin America and Mexico as well. So thank you so much again.
Thank you for the invitation.